And maybe Israel could turn itself to be the innovation nation, not just a startup nation, and make Israel to be the light to the world of how to solve these problems in a much better way.
You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today, here on the Land of Israel Network, on the landofisrael.com, just 4 weeks away from our exciting Israel election. And we are continuing our effort on this show to introduce our listeners in Israel and around the world to the candidates, one from each political party. And now we come to the Gesher party of Orly Levy, the former Israel Beitenu Knesset member, a party that focuses on socioeconomic issues. And we have on the line Orly Levy's number 2 in the party, Dadi Perlmutter. Thank you for coming here on Inside Israel Today.
Thank you for having me.
So please tell the world about yourself.
Well, as you mentioned, my name is Dadi Perlmutter. I'm married, 4 kids, 6 grandkids. I spent most of my adult life in high tech. I was Executive Vice President of Intel Corporation, responsible for all Intel competing products.
Executive Vice President in the world, not just in Israel.
Yes, in the world, yes. I was basically reporting to the Chief Executive Officer of Intel at the time. And I was managing a business, basically almost all Intel business at the time, $50 billion revenue a year. So I had a lot of experience in technology. But on top of that, and besides that, and very much so after leaving Intel in 2014, I'm focusing very much not just on technology and high-tech in Israel, but very much on being a social activist, predominantly focusing on very much solving or reducing the gap between the haves and the have-not in all phases of especially education, job opportunities, and if it has to do with the geography and social periphery, but also other communities like Ethiopian kids and Arabs. That's basically what I did. And when my wife and I spent time in the U.S. when I was at Intel, we've been also doing social activists in connecting young kids, college age, Israeli natives or born to Israeli parents, to connect them to Judaism, the Jewish community, and Israel.
As someone who was raised by Israeli parents in America and went to college at Northwestern, I wish such a thing existed when I was around back then.
Yes, but it's very active, and now it has about 2,500 youngsters and in about 250 colleges. Of course, when we went back to Israel, we left it to another Israeli organization to run it and expand it.
Wonderful. So there aren't a lot of politicians in Israel who have managed a company of $50 billion. Why would anyone with that kind of experience leave it all behind and enter politics? You obviously don't need the money.
No, it's not about the money. If I gave you, the taste of the social activities that I've been engaged with, it's not about money. I think the Israeli politics and the Israeli leadership needs people with experience like mine. I could say for maybe 2 reasons. One, the gaps in society, in my view, are one of the biggest dangers to the existence and the well-being of Israel as a country, as a nation.
Among the largest gaps in the world.
It's among the largest in the world. And you want to do it and solve it not because of fairness, because fairness is important and being a good person. It's an economical leverage, a huge economical leverage. Just, the high-tech industry in Israel, which is the jewel of the crown, and I'm a proud member of this community, but it's short of tens of thousands of talented engineers. And if you don't get more people into the game, could be Arabs, ultra-Orthodox, women, students from the periphery of Israel, will not be able to sustain and maintain the great success, and it will go away, which is going to be a huge problem. The other thing that is big, you know, the Israel politics and many of the Israeli systems, including education and to some extent the health system, is running. By the way, it's a true problem in the world. Is running by the ways people love to solve problems in the 20th century, and we are now deep into the 21st century. Where are all the capabilities that exist in the world today, and how they are employed to solve huge problems into healthcare, into education, and maybe Israel could turn itself to be the innovation nation, not just a startup nation, to show the world, because these are world problems. These are not Israeli problems. And I think we have the talent, the capabilities, and we are lacking the politicians with the leadership to go make it happen and make Israel to be the light to the world of how to solve these problems in a much better way.
Why did you decide that Orly Levy is the person who has the leadership to be that light? You probably could have gone into any party.
Could be, but I believe that these issues require focus. And all the other parties are all engaged in 500,000 different issues, all important, all right, and that should be dealt with. And I think Orly Levy convinced me that her heart and brain is into these issues of solving these problems and moving ahead and being the voice of the people, because people, these are the day-to-day problems of people to vote. They vote for the big things with respect to negotiation with Palestinians and whatever, which is important. I think the influence that we all have, including politicians, is not that huge, and people forget about what needs to be done. And the health system in Israel is in a crisis. The occupancy is 150% in all kind of departments. It's impossible. Why don't anyone solve these problems? And it's not new. It didn't happen yesterday. We needed 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it's not just building more hospitals. It's finding solutions which are part of the new world, the 21st century world, that have solutions to have people treated at home because of the technology. You don't have to sit at the hospital and get all these horrible infections that you get when you're in a hospital. You could sit at home and be monitored. And if something happens, you could get treated. I give it as an example. I could go on and on with solutions that exist and could be developed. And there's a lot of energy in the Israeli technology ecosystem to work on these problems. But who is the person that leading that to go happen? And I believe that Gesher is the focus on this one. It's not just Orly Levy. The other people that she has been able to gather around her are really focused on solving these problems and are tuned in to go do solve these problems.
Were you disappointed when it didn't work out to become part of the larger bloc that's running against Netanyahu, blue and white? There were negotiations between Orly Levy and Benny Gantz. Had those negotiations succeeded, you as Orly Levy's number 2 would have been a top 10 candidate in a party that could form the government. You would have been an obvious cabinet minister, and now even if you cross the threshold, it's doubtful that the party would receive more than one portfolio.
Could be, but when you jump into doing things, you have to assume that not everything will work your way, and this is the case. But this is fine. I've done many things within Intel, and after leaving Intel, outside this Intel, with a lot of startups. And I didn't always go the obvious way. Usually, I make most of my successes going the non-obvious way.
One of those startups that you were involved in, you're on the board of directors of Mellanox, which was sold yesterday to NVIDIA for $6.9 billion. Do you benefit from that?
Yeah, not bad, right?
Yeah.
Yes, as a director, I get my share. I think it's a wonderful solution, but I think that the real story is that people do not understand that. I said it in another interview. All Mellanox employees have stocks and stock options of the company, all of them. And so as a result, they benefit, some for more, some for less, but all benefit from this kind of an activity. This is not a social commodity. The center of capitalism, but this is how capitalism works well, when it shares the success with everyone, including employees.
What's your first bill that you're going to pass?
I think my main focus is education. Education and growth. I want to find ways to change how education works. I want to open up the system. If you want to bring innovation to the education system, you have to give more responsibility and more authority to the school principal and the teachers. Today the system is way too rigid, and therefore nothing happens. Nothing great happens. And this would be one of the big things I want to do. And the other thing I want to do with respect to economy is to focus on bringing more resources into small and medium businesses.
That is important. Are you worried about not crossing that threshold? I mean, unlike others, you do have jobs to go back to if it doesn't work out.
I don't worry about myself. I have been able to manage myself in all kinds of situations. And my late father told me that if you worry about what will happen, you'll never do anything. You'll be frozen like a rabbit. And if something that happens, you're smart enough to go figure that out. And I think he was right. I wish I would have listened to him much more when I was younger.
One thing that we can say about Gesher is it's one of the only parties that hasn't really said who they want to win the election. Who have you voted for in the past? Who do you want to win and be Prime Minister?
I think the Gesher is going to join every government that would really focus on the issues I was mentioning, the day-to-day life of and what's important, the healthcare system, transportation, and all the issues that people worry, and whoever going to accept, especially in the healthcare, what we need, we will join. Of course, we support whoever wants to do eventually a deal with the Palestinians. I hope it will happen soon, to make sure that we live together and make sure that we engage all the parties around. So we have not said, and we rightly so haven't said, and that's our strategy.
Any last message to the people around the world who don't live in Israel, who are listening to you and learning about you?
I know, as I lived part of my life, this is my Intel career in North America, and I understand the importance of the Jewish people to the strength and the existence of Israel, and I believe that Israel is important to them. I wish the Israeli leadership would do much more to connect with the Jews living outside of Israel other than disconnecting them. And I think it is hugely important for them, for us, and for the Jewish people.
Dadi Perlmutter, thank you for coming here on Inside Israel Today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
After the break, we'll talk more about what's going on inside Israel today.
Remember always, said President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that you and I especially are descended from immigrants and revolutionists. We look for a younger generation that is going to be more American than we are. Now, I don't know that I could say I'm more American than FDR, but I can say that I'm a descendant of immigrants, and I've got more than a little bit of the revolutionist in me, because I'm Rav Mike Foyer, and this is the Jewish Story.
Join Rav Mike Foyer for the best Jewish history podcast, The Jewish Story, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
And we're back here on Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com. That was an interesting interview with the number 2 in the Gesher party, Mr. Dadi Perlmutter. Not David, but Dadi. When you make that much money, you can have people call you whatever you want. And so the man oversaw a $50 billion company in Intel. And now, just on the side, was on the board of directors of the Mellanox company that was purchased for $6.9 billion in the second largest acquisition in Israel's history after the Mobileye acquisition by Intel. And he's seems like a rather modest guy who's got his feet on the floor and can down to the earth and really wants to give back, and that's why he's running for Knesset. That's very nice. He can just relax and live on the money that he just made this week in the acquisition of Mellanox. Is probably more than I'll see in my lifetime. But he instead wants to be there in the Knesset, even though he's running in a party that might not cross the threshold, and even if it does, he would not become a cabinet minister. Orly Levy would become the cabinet minister. He would just be a regular MK. And the fact that he's willing to make that investment in time is very honorable and very nice. And we're seeing this happen at a time when there's a lot of parties that may or may not cross the threshold. People who we've been following for years, like Avigdor Lieberman, Moshe Kachlon, Meretz, Shas. Who knows whether any of these parties are going to be crossing the threshold? Gesher hasn't crossed the threshold in a while. And right now you've got Moshe Feiglin's Zehut party crossing the threshold. And as I promised listeners, if the Zehut party starts crossing the threshold in the polls, I will interview someone, not Moshe Feiglin, but someone new from that party, and I will keep that promise, ladies and gentlemen. There are 4 weeks left before the end of the election. There are interesting people on that list, and so I will indeed select one of them for the final 3 weeks. Perhaps would have even done it for today, but I already had this interview with Mr. Perlmutter lined up already more than a week ago. Which party crosses that threshold might end up deciding the election. We might end up seeing more votes for the right bloc because parties on the left end up not crossing the threshold, or more votes for the center-left bloc because parties on the right don't end up crossing that 3.25% electoral threshold. We're talking about an estimated 138,000 votes in a country where 6 million people are eligible to vote on April 9th. So whether Mr. Perlmutter enters the Knesset might end up deciding who the next prime minister is going to be. So yes, it really, really does matter. And this week we saw how Orly Levy claimed the health portfolio for herself. Said she wants to do a revolution in healthcare. Other parties are claiming the education ministry and fighting over that. That's nice that they're already forming governments, even though we don't know yet who will be the person who will be appointed by the president of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, to form the government. We do know that Reuven Rivlin happens to detest Netanyahu, happens to be disgusted by Netanyahu, happens to condemn statements that Netanyahu makes left and right. But if Netanyahu has an easier time forming a government, and then there's no doubt that Rivlin will appoint him to form a government. Let's not forget, even when you see polls that say the center-left bloc has 61 seats and the center-right bloc has 59 seats, that is not a victory for the center-left bloc because the Arab parties are not willing to join the government. That is a 59-48 victory for Netanyahu, and that is what could result in there not being a government formed at all. Or the likely scenario that the president will require there to be a national unity government of the Blue and White Party and Likud together. And don't be surprised if he says that Blue and White will govern first, which is a nice way of saying, bye-bye, Mr. Netanyahu. Time for you to deal with your criminal cases. Now, there are developments in the criminal cases over the last 24 hours. Yesterday, the Attorney General announced that the hearing of Netanyahu will be held no later than the 10th of July. The information that has been gathered, only part of it has been released to the public. The rest will be released to the public only the day after the election. Now, it is possible there will be leaks between now and then that could affect the election, perhaps in the last few days before the election. But the election will take place before everything comes out. I mean, before it all comes out, I mean. And this will happen, this hearing, right after the process has ended to form a government. Netanyahu will have to be, if he wins the election, preparing for that big legal hearing that will decide his future, decide whether he goes to jail or whether he gets totally acquitted while he has to deal with forming a new government. If anything, it could help Netanyahu legally if he doesn't end up being the one who forms the government. Now, so Netanyahu has been indicted pending that hearing. It is not a final indictment. That indictment will take place somewhere between October and maybe 6 months after that, by February of 2020, a year after the pre-hearing indictment happened in February of 2019. And now there's also the possibility that Netanyahu, immediately after forming a coalition, will find a way to pass some kind of immunity bill that blocks him from being investigated. The leaders of Yisrael Beitenu and the New Right of Victor Lieberman and Naftali Bennett said they would be in favor of passing some kind of bill that would prevent prime ministers and presidents from being investigated, but they say it should not apply retroactively, which wouldn't help Netanyahu at all. Today, on the radio, Moshe Gafni, one of the leaders of the United Torah Judaism Party, said he would be in favor of passing such a bill that would apply to the prime minister. So if you already have Netanyahu's Likud, and you already have United Torah Judaism, and you'd probably have Shas, you're not too far away from getting that majority that you would need. And maybe Mr. Bennett would change his mind under certain circumstances, and if certain portfolios are offered. You never know. And the same thing goes for Mr. Lieberman. And that could make this even more exciting. Right now, there is increased mudslinging going on politically. Yesterday, at an event of the Blue and White Party in Beersheba, the leader of the party, Benny Gantz, said that Netanyahu is not the successor of Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, former prime ministers, and the ideological inspiration of the right in Israel, Zev Jabotinsky. He said that Jabotinsky and Begin and Shamir would be ashamed of Netanyahu. Who would be proud of Netanyahu, Benny Gantz says? Rabbi Meir Kahane, who was the leader of the Kach party, who the Knesset, after being elected to one term in the Knesset, was prevented from running again because the Supreme Court ruled that his party was racist. So that was a relatively low blow by Benny Gantz, and perhaps he's becoming less afraid to attack because of his party not doing as well in the polls as people might have thought. A week ago it was 36-30, a significant lead of Blue and White over Likud. Now, 4 polls in a row show about a 3-seat lead. That would not be enough for the president to be able to say, okay, you're going to be able to form the most stable government. If the Blue and White Party wins by 3 seats, but without the Arabs, Blue and White only has 40-something seats that would be willing to join him, then Netanyahu is going to form the next government by himself. And right now, unless something changes dramatically, that is what's going to happen. Despite all that he has done that alienate a lot of people in Israel, his political base is strong, and they don't care about the criminal investigations against him. But then again, hey, 4 weeks left. Anything can happen over the next 4 weeks. And that is the beauty in Israeli politics. Things can change upside down, right side up, and probably will, day in and day out, over the next 28 days. So stay tuned to the weeks ahead of Inside Israel Today, where we will be introducing you 2 more candidates ahead of that election. Looking forward. Thank you very much, and shalom from Jerusalem. Bye-bye.
You're listening to the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com, broadcasting the truth and beauty of